So good afternoon once again, and welcome to joining us here at the African Population and Health Research Center on this very important webinar on bioethics in biomedical research. And maybe it might be important for us to just reflect a little on why is it important to reflect on bioethics in discovery research, for instance. As biomedical innovation accelerates from AI-enabled data science and gene editing to next-generation vaccines and regeneration medicine, the ethical questions that actually surround discovery research are continuing to grow more urgent and even getting more complex. So as we open this dialogue, we must confront contemporary dilemmas. Rapid pandemic trials are actually needed. AI and big data biases are key players in the space. Genomic editing is the reality of our times. Biobanks are here to stay, and the ethics of emergent technologies are here. As you understand with me, these issues will therefore demand continuous reflection, adaptive governance, and a research culture that is actually grounded on accountability and trust. So today's webinar is actually going to invite us to think critically, engage openly, and collectively envision ethical frameworks that sustain responsible scientific discovery for Africa and beyond. So I will be your moderator today. I'm Lucho Engelbert-Bain, and I'm head of international programs at the African Population and Health Research Center. Maybe just an idea for those of you who are new to the African Population and Health Research Center. The African Population and Health Research Center, APHRC, is an evidence generation to policy organization based here in Nairobi with a regional office in Dakar, Senegal. We do three main streams of work. We do core research. We have a research and related capacity strengthening mandate, as well as a policy engagement and communications unit. For this webinar today, it actually sits within our research and related capacity strengthening unit within a program which we call the ARSH program. So what is the ARSH program all about? The Afrique Research Support Hub, which is the ARSH, is a collaboration between Wellcome, or the Wellcome Trust as it was known, and the African Population and Health Research Center. It is a capacity strengthening initiative designed to build regional capacity to mentor and support post-PhD African researchers in securing grants from international funders. The program targets early and mid-career postdoctoral researchers based at African institutions who aspire to become competitive principal investigators on international grants. ARSH combines in-person regional workshops and online grant writing course, structured mentorship, and seed funding to provide an integrated pathway from a research idea to a competitive grant proposal. You would therefore agree with me, and I'm very excited with the statement that was made by the British Academy in 2023. The outcome of the research that we do is important, but the process, the how at times, is even more important. And that's where bioethics actually comes into play. Invited to actually guide us through this particular process today on this inaugural webinar on bioethics in discovery research is Dr. Lucy Ochola, whom we are very fortunate to have as our guest speaker today. Dr. Lucy is currently based at the Kenya Institute of Primate Research as a senior research scientist and head of the Department of Infectious Diseases, where she focuses on parasitology, mainly malaria and schistosomiasis, understanding the immunology, disease manifestation, treatment, and diagnosis in endemic population, and also utilizes non-clinical models. She's currently the Secretary General for the Kenya Society of Immunology, Vice President of the Federation of Immunological Societies. She works to support the Kenyan Society of Immunology by improving awareness of immunology through organizing workshops and providing scientists with an opportunity to network. She holds a research associate position at the Nelson Mandela University in South Africa. Dr. Lucy Ochola holds a BSc and an MPhil from the University of Manchester in the UK and a PhD in medical parasitology and infection biology from the Swiss Tropical and Public Health Institute from the University of Basel in Switzerland. Before Dr. Mary actually comes in, and you know that she is actually the right person at the right place, maybe just a couple of things. It's important for you to use the chat function for your introduction so that we know exactly who is in the house, where you're working, the country from which you are joining in from, and you have any specific comments or questions. We have a very huge team that is actually going to be taking care of those questions. We encourage all of you to engage in this conversation, even after this presentation on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and tag APHRC in your engagements. Without much ado, I would therefore leave the floor to our speaker to take us through her presentation. And once again, welcome to APHRC. Over to you, Dr. Mary. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lucio, for the warm welcome and introduction. I think the team want to upload my slides kindly. Okay. The slides seem to have disappeared. Okay. Okay, so thank you. So I want to just appreciate the ARSH team for putting this webinar together and really just support the support offered through APHRC and the Wellcome Trust. Next slide, please. So I've been given the task over the next 30 minutes to just take you through bioethics, specifically around the area of biomedical research. So next slide. Okay, so just a brief outline of my presentation. First of all, I think we're about 40 or so people on the call. If you could just have your phones on standby, we're just gonna have a quick question just to get a feel of people's understanding around ethics. From there, I will then go and just briefly go through defining bioethics. Why does it really matter? And I've been guided that most of you are doing postdocs involved in either medical or biomedical research related studies. So I think most of you will be familiar with this topic, but there's no harm in us going through and just reminding ourselves where we are and we want to go in a space where AI and different technologies are coming up. The rest of my talk is divided into two parts. And it's important for me to talk about the human bioethics and then finish off with animal-related bioethics. Next slide, please. Okay, so I hope you can all see that question. What is bioethics? I think it's the next slide, kindly. If you could go back, this is meant to be, I'm not sure this is going to work for us. It's meant to be a slide, that may not work. Okay, I was hoping we could all feed into that question, but let me move on because of time. I was hoping we could, the question is asked and then you are all to give in responses and it would appear on the screen, but I guess because it's being shared from the other side, it cannot work. So we'll just move on. Next slide. Okay, so into the definition of ethics. As we all appreciate, ethics is defined as our moral, looking internally at our moral status. What principles do we abide to? What values do we hold? Is it equitable? And what standards do we follow? And we also bring in the legal aspect together with the social implications. And all these have implications on the biological and medical research that we do and the various medical practices that we're involved in. For me, I define it into 5 main areas, and most of you are familiar with this. If we look at the medical ethics, we're encompassing what are the patient's rights? Are we considered informed consent? And we as healthcare providers must be responsible in the work that we do, especially when it involves patients. For those who work within the research space like myself, any work we do, whether it involves humans or if it's animal subjects, we must ensure that we are looking at areas around risk management in terms of the patient or the animals you're working with, and in regards to humans, obviously there's consent involved. The other area is public health ethics. We are all familiar with the recent pandemic that happened, the COVID pandemic. And how do we balance the needs of the community, who gets the vaccine, who doesn't get the vaccine? Under the aspect of health policy, we all are pushing towards having policies that guide various interventions that we come up with. So we could be considering the access to healthcare, who has access to specific healthcare. And within the African context, there's a lot of talk around the universal healthcare program coverage. So we're trying to ensure the whole population has access to healthcare. Who gets that access to medical care and who doesn't? And for reasons, why should that happen or not happen? Resource allocation, healthcare disparities. And then the last point is emerging technologies. We are familiar with the whole area of biomedical engineering. There's a cloning, there's a biotechnology. We need to have ethics and guidance in how we adopt all these emerging technologies. Next slide, please. So overall, bioethics aims to provide frameworks for making difficult decisions in the healthcare and research space. And in the context of humans, it ensures respect for human dignity and social justice. Next slide. And really the question then I beg to all of you is, why does this really matter? I think it matters for several reasons, and I've highlighted these 6 ones that I've put up here, actually 7. It will guide us in terms of our behavior. We know that there are various frameworks that exist, and those frameworks are there to guide us in doing the right thing and avoiding what's wrong. And really, as we do these things, we're helping to improve systems within our organizations and how we handle different individuals. It promotes trust. So I think of it, even in my space as a research scientist, where I have to mentor young people, what sort of relationship do I have between my mentees versus the mentors? And trust is crucial for collaboration and social cohesion. It encourages accountability. So here we're looking at ensuring that both individuals or the organizations we work in take responsibility for whatever actions we have as pertains to the research that we're doing. The 4th point is it supports social justice. Here we're looking at promoting fairness and justice, and we're enabling equitable treatment, so ensuring the people who need the treatment, irrespective of whether they come from marginalized areas, have access to a given treatment. It enhances decision-making. So here we are looking at ethical considerations can lead to more thoughtful and reasoned decision-making. The next point is it balances how we handle conflicts. So it will help us navigate through situations where interests may clash. And really where interests clash, the frameworks are there to guide. So we can have resolutions to whatever challenges we have deciding on how to handle different scenarios. And the last thing is it influences both policy and law. So we have various laws and policies that guide the work that we do. And I think the ethics is important in ensuring that those laws are followed based on the laws that have been governed. And it shapes both societal, sorry, if you could go back one slide, you've jumped a bit, shaping society's norms and guiding acceptable behavior. So overall, ethics is able to nurture just and humane society and encourages individuals to act with integrity and fairness. Next slide. So for me, when I think of bioethics, these are some of the terms and words that come to mind. You will grapple between, do we provide life support to somebody or withdraw it? How do we handle the doctor-patient relationship? I already mentioned about mentee-mentor. And when it comes to vaccinations, so like the COVID vaccine, we had, how do we ensure that people within like low, middle income countries have access to these vaccines? So all these encompass the whole of bioethics. Next slide. So I want us to pause a little bit. I always believe when you know where you've started, you know where you're going. So I like this phrase from Maya Angelou, where if we know our past, we know where we're heading. So she's phrased like this: I have great respect for the past. If you don't know where you come from, you don't know where you're going. So let me continue reminding us where the history around ethics began. And I'll just take you through this next slide quickly, kindly. So when we look at where did the whole ethics evolve from, where did it start? If you look into history, and this is looking at early 19th century into even the early 20th century, we had a lot of very there were, like during the war, like the Japanese war, the Nazi experiments, there were certain things that were done to humans which were not ethical. So for instance, during the Japanese Imperial Army, there's a lot of biological warfare and medical testing in civilians. There was the other example, I know you're all familiar with this, was the Tuskegee study where syphilis was introduced into people, and treatment was withheld, despite the fact that penicillin was actually available. The other example was the Wilbur experiments, where children who were retarded were intentionally infected with hepatitis. And already here, there was an issue around consent. They were not told exactly what was happening. And then more recently, as we moved in the 1950s, we had other experiments where Henrietta Lacks, so this is the HeLa cell lines, was taken from an African American. And if till date, we still use these cells for various vaccine studies. And what actually happened is the person who the cells were taken from died within a year of those cells being taken, but there was no prior informed consent taken. And as we move into the African space, there have been a number of studies in the 90s where, if I give the example, is Zimbabwe, 500 patients in Zimbabwe were given anesthetics and new drugs, but no ethical approval was given by the National Drug Authority. And more recently in Nigeria, another study where children were given a drug, and these are children who had meningitis, and the control group were given ceftriaxone, an antibacterial drug, but they were not given the effective dose. So clearly, there's history when it comes to lack of regulation when studies were done using humans. Next slide, kindly. So based on all these previous unethical experiments, a number of ethical human experimentation, new guidelines have been set up, principles. So again, this is just reminding you, we had the Nuremberg trials where the first set of basic principles were established. And here it emphasized voluntary consent. In 1964, there was the Declaration of the Helsinki, and this basically provided a more comprehensive and evolving set of ethical principles. And here they introduced the whole concept of independent ethics review committees should be put in place. And from 1979, there was a Belmont report where a whole ethical framework was developed and guiding the research using humans and to assure protection to the human subjects that are involved. And it outlined key principles, respect for persons, beneficence, and justice. What now is coming into play is how to develop global research ethics that looks at modern challenges, the AI, the big data. How do we handle this? Next slide. So let me just remind you what those core ethical principles look like. So the main four are respect for persons, where we ensure that all individuals who are enrolled into a project must be consented, and that participation should be voluntary. The non-maleficence, where the duty is to avoid any harm to participants. So you might look at the benefit versus the harm and make sure that's well articulated. There's the beneficence, where researchers must aim to maximize the potential benefits while minimizing any possible harm. There's a whole aspect of justice. The benefits and burdens of research must be distributed fairly among all groups within the society. And we must also really diligently ensure that we look at the vulnerable groups, because this was a problem that we noticed in some of the early studies in the early 19th century. I also include scientific validity, because those of us working within the research space, research should be based on sound scientific principles and methodologies to ensure that the findings are legitimate and applicable. And lastly, for any research that you do, there must be post-research responsibility. So for those of us working in the research space, we're always looking at how do you take your findings back to the community? The research, you just don't end at, publishing a paper, but giving back to the society that you worked in. So to tell them what the impact was. Next slide, please. Now, I've talked about, how the ethics around research, but this is a new area that's coming up. How do we handle the new emerging challenges? So I've put 6 of them here. AI and big data in biomedical research. A lot of the times we collect data within the specified time of the research project, but a lot of this data is archived. How do we now handle data that has is past the lifespan of the project, whether it's genetic data, etc. There's a whole aspect of gene editing and CRISPR technology that's coming up, inserting new genes into humans. How do we handle that? I like this new one, the use of robots in medicine. I know China is at the forefront of this, allowing a robot to basically take over the whole aspect of treatment of a patient. There's a whole area of stem cell research, using embryonic cells versus the potential of alleviating suffering. So I know of teams in Japan, which the stem cell technology, they're thinking of how do we use this in a sickle cell patient, and the ethics around that is yet to be addressed. And as we do all this research, there's a global health research, equity in low resource settings. And lastly, the pandemic research ethics, rapid trials versus safety. Like right now, there's talk about the mpox in the African continent. There may be drugs available for that, but we don't have the policies in place that would allow us then to just roll these drugs out. So do we use it as an emergency setting, yes or no? So these are just some of the emerging challenges that we need to think about even in this research space. But even as we do all these, there are different modern governance and regulatory frameworks that guide us. I've just put up a few of them. There's some international guidelines that we follow. So there's the CIOMS, which stands for the Council for International Organization of Medical Sciences. There's the WHO, there's Africa CDC, who are pushing and supporting a lot of the African countries to set up, regulation around introduction of vaccines or drugs, especially in epidemic sort of settings. There's the International Clinical Trials Registry Platform, and all these are there to guide us, especially when we're working around these different areas. Under the data privacy and genetic research. So right now, there's the whole talk of precision medicine. What do we do when we get like a patient's genetic data? Who the patient has rights, but how do we handle that data beyond? So I've just put up a few within the EU. They have General Data Protection Regulation. There's a Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act in the US. Here in Africa, there have been teams working, H3 Africa. I reached out to Africa CDC. So what they're setting up now, this is not quite in places, but a whole genome sequencing and data and governance that hopefully will support research around genetic data in the continent. And any research we do, obviously, it has to be approved by institutional review boards and ethics committee. But I pose this question: how do we handle emerging challenges? I know, example here in Kenya, all these new technologies coming up. We may not have the policy, so it's time now for us to pick up and start putting this documentation together and maybe borrowing from what has been done before. Next slide, please. Okay, so the takeaway for the human ethics in the first half of my presentation is I've just highlighted a checklist for ethical compliance. What should we be looking out for? I think the process of ethics is not a one-time thing. There's got to be continuous ethics education, even as we're dealing with these emerging technologies. And we need to continue engaging each other, scientists and maybe ethics committees, to make sure we're up to par with the latest development in this space. Okay, thank you. So I'll end there on the human ethics. I hope I'm not too bad for time. I'll try to take us through quickly the next part of my presentation. So we've talked about human ethics. I think the roadmap for animal ethics has taken the same trajectory. I think for me, this is just to highlight some of the work that animals are used for, understanding disease mechanisms, the treatment and drugs, psychological and behavioral studies, as well as public health and safety. Next slide. The history is also similar to humans, although I think the research around animals dates much further back than humans. Before Christ, Hippocrates did work around animal anatomy and physiology. With the Middle Ages, there's work around dissection and anatomy. And if we move into the 19th century, Louis Pasteur basically advanced the vaccine development using polio and etc. Okay, and the first laws regulating animal research was established in the UK in the 1876. So there's history in animal-related research. Next slide, please. And this was just to show you, research in the animal space, dates back into the early 1900s. and with developments for different treatments for humans. Next slide. But when it comes to animals, obviously there are various dilemmas that we have to handle. And I know I work in this space, so it's important just to mention that. On one hand, the use of animals for scientific purposes is regarded as indispensable. It can support science and could lead to reduction of human and animal suffering. But we have to wait as scientists. Do we do research for animals? If we do research on animals, they will suffer. On the other hand, if we do not do research, humans will suffer. And when you look at animals, they represent the whole organism. And these are some of the reasons why you'd want to use animals. Next slide, please. The ethics around research, animal research, are definitely governed by various frameworks. We have what we call the 3 Rs, where we incorporate reduction, using the minimal amount of animals. We refine, we ensure that the animals are in an environment that is comfortable. We also replace, we look at alternatives, which I'll mention in a bit. We have the EU directives. We have ethical committees that guide our science. We have different, books that guide the work that we do. Next slide, please. And as we think of animal ethics and principles, there's a whole aspect of we need to avoid undue suffering to the animals and follow critical ethical considerations. There's also the provision of human care for any scientific and ethical work that we do. And we also appreciate that if we don't take care of the animals, you get poor experimental outcomes. And most of the ethical guidelines work on the assumption that animal experimentation must be justified because of the significant potential benefits it has to humans. Next slide. Continuing this point, all animal experimentation is considered by multidisciplinary ethics committee. And we also follow what we call an extensive review of the research protocol that you undertake. I'd already mentioned we have both national and international laws, which I'll highlight in a bit. And it includes the 3 Rs that I mentioned. And all animal ethics committees should review a given proposal that is submitted. Next slide. In terms of the ethics and animal use, we have respect for animals. There's a moral responsibility that you as a research scientist must stick to and adhere to. And in doing that, you are ensuring that you minimize harm and ensure the welfare of all animals in the research project are adhered to. It requires critical thinking and thought in the terms of the judgment and analysis that you do. There's a trust, so we're looking at responsible conduct of research using animals, the human care and use of those animals. And really any investigator, anyone handling these animals must be responsible at all phases of the work they undertake. Next slide. In terms of the animal welfare principles, there are 5 of them: freedom for hunger. So this is just how we handle animals: freedom from discomfort, pain, injury, and disease, express and normal behavior in the environment that they're hosted, freedom from fear and distress. And lastly, the human treatment ensures that all animals are treated with respect and consideration throughout the whole experimental lifespan. Next point. We have this framework. It's quite detailed, but I'd mentioned the 3 Rs already. But these were new regulations that came up, I think, in the last maybe 5 or so years. And here we're looking at the social aspects: responsibility, respect, regulation, reckoning, righteous. We also have what we call the scientific integrity. Is it relevant? Relevance. Is it transferable? Is it reliable? Is it reckoning in terms of accountability, etc.? So if you look at any animal-related work, this is the framework that you would incorporate in your studies. Next slide. It's fine for me to say we use animals, but research is not stagnant, and we know what's happening in the funding space. So we also consider alternative non-animal models. We have the in vitro models that we're looking at organs on chips, in vitro fertilization. We are able to culture different parasites in the lab. We have the in silico approaches where you look at genetic data using computerized methods. And we also have the invertebrates, Drosophila, zebrafish, xenopas, and C. elegans. So these are alternative models that we are also considering. Next slide. But within the African context, there are challenges to utilizing some of these non-animal alternative models. A majority of us do use in vitro methods, and I think that's widely available. But the challenge with alternative models is the limited resource. We know there's quite a bit of infrastructure that's required. And some of them need sophisticated computational tools, which is not accessible here. The regulatory framework in the use of these alternative models is still underdeveloped, and there's room for us to improve on this. And what I want to say here is in silico, yes, it's available. And if I was to take an example of my institution, we lack adequate infrastructure and very few people actually trained in this space. So for us, we only have like 2 people trained up on this. But the storage for these large data is still lacking. So until this is improved, then we will have challenges utilizing these alternative methods. So there's room for more training, and maybe creating more awareness can help us utilize these in a different way. Next slide. So in the next maybe 2 minutes, quickly, let me just share with you our story. It's always good to put things in perspective. Next slide. So we, at my institution, we use these different guidelines, international guidelines, just to guide the research that we do around animals. Next slide. We also have local Kenyan regulatory environment that supports the work that we do. And within our institution, different policies that we've developed. Next slide. And just, so in terms of the bodies regulating animal welfare, I think what I want to say is in Africa, I think this is increasing through the various science, technology innovations. I think Africa leads it. In 1978, there are these policies in place. But within the last maybe 10 or 15 years, a number of countries, if I look at East Africa, are now putting up these policies to guide, to regulate research around the animal space as well. And in Kenya, this is regulated by the National Commission for Science and Technology. And they regulate and assure quality of Kenyan science, technology, and innovation sector. And as this body, this regulatory body accredits all research ethics committees. It trains on the animal ethics, it trains on the humans, it monitors ethical review boards within the country. And because this process is continuous, we also submit quarterly reports. So that keeps us in check when it comes to the research that we do. Next slide. We also have ethics review committee. So I'm sure all of you come from different centers, research facilities, hospitals, etc. So for us, this is just gives you a feel of what our committee does. We ensure we uphold research around animal welfare and we take care of the country's needs. In terms of the structure, we have, because we are an animal regulatory committee, we have scientists, we have veterinarians, we have a lawyer, we have a layperson, we have a community representative. And they approve they do research integrity, they look at post-approval monitoring. There's a continuous training of both the members as well as ensuring that people who are undertaking studies have the actual qualifications. Next slide. So the takeaway, hopefully you'll appreciate that for you to undertake any work around animal ethics, you must ensure that you look at critical frameworks. So for me, I'd shared with you the 12 hours framework. And whatever research we do, there's a balancing between the research needs and the ethical responsibilities that we as scientists have. And for me, I believe in continuous dialogue, and that improves any research that you do, whether it's in the human aspect or in the animal research. So with that, let me end with my last slide, just to appreciate again APHRC and all the participants in this meeting, and I'm open for questions. Thank you very much.
No, thanks so much, Lucy. That was really amazing. I actually learned a lot. So I know that our colleagues are kind of gathering quite some questions from the chat. But maybe as you take a cup of coffee or water, Dr. Lucy, I have 2 questions. Maybe just setting the scene so that you understand that most of our audience here are postdoctoral researchers, early career scientists or scientists, and we are living in a specific reality, a reality where, one, developing the interests in discovery research, we need to do more work, especially when that is concerned. Secondly, we are living in very hard times when it comes to securing funding. And if I take this context, I will just maybe want you just to reflect as the audience prepare some questions on how can early career researchers navigate the increasingly competitive funding landscape, most importantly within the discovery research space, and what are the strategies that are most effective in your experience in aligning innovative ideas with funder priorities without compromising scientific integrity or originality. your reflections on that would be very useful. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think that's, let me just start by saying thank you for your question. I think it's a very important one. So if I can just share my own experiences. So interesting enough, I started in the human space and I decided to move into animal. I think the animal space is fraught with challenges in funding. So your question just comes in very handy. But I think my strategy has been that, I've learned I think research is not static. Research is a sort that where you have to have the creative mind. So I moved from malaria into schistosomiasis. But I brought in my expertise in malaria into the schisto, and it was a whole new area that I had to learn. But the one thing I found that where you could be innovative is, take your idea. So for me, I've worked in the in vitro space quite a bit. So for me, what would be interested is, I mentioned alternative models. So taking organs and seeing how you can utilize organs to then generate questions around mechanisms on parasite, movement in an individual. So that for me would be like the discovery sort of research that people are looking for. And what is also critical is finding the right collaboration. So I'm someone who pushes for, if you can attend conferences, if you can attend trainings, don't shy away from engaging, the most experienced scientists. That could be your lead to the next grant. And now more and more we're looking at multidisciplinary. This journey, you cannot walk alone, you must work with others. So identifying the key people who would support you and work with you. Young scientists have to be careful that, you cannot be the PI in a grant. I think you've got to walk that step and sacrifice initially. So you have a co-investigator who supports you. So they give you, the next step to move up. And then when you gain experience from them, then you'll be able to get the next grant. And don't shy away from seed grants. Seed grants might look little to you, whether it's like $15,000. I remember there's a funding consortium in West Africa called ARNT, African Research for Neglected Tropical Diseases. I got a grant for $15,000, but that connected me to the team in South Africa that has given me my attachment to Nelson Mandela University, you see? So that small grant was connecting, and then now you can build up other grants. So start small, but always know that you're going to move towards a bigger grant. Thank you.
No, thanks so much, Dr. Lucy. And I think that your last statement to me really actually stands out because of the advice I've always given as somebody who has worked in the funding world is always treat the grant that you have as your very last. It doesn't matter the size of the grant. It really doesn't matter the size of the grant because funders have a lot of funding inertia and funders have institutional memory. Funders speak to one another. So if you get into the good books of a single funder, you might be getting into the good books of a network of funders. But if you get into the bad books of a funder, be rest assured you have already been screwed, although no one is going to tell you by a network of funders. Thank you very much. I don't know, my colleagues, Eugenia and Alipio, do we have any questions from the audience?
There's one from Emeka. He says, I want to ask that are there specific certifications for anyone who wants to be on research ethics boards? And do you have any recommendations of maybe only courses for MSc in bioethics?
Okay. So maybe I'd want to understand, so the way I started involving myself with ethics was I was initially just a reviewer. I was not particularly on a board per se, but within the institution I was affiliated to, I offered my services within the review process. So you send a proposal, you review. It's almost similar to reviewing your peer-reviewed journals that you submit. So I think that will give you the basis first to gain experience on how do you review these proposals. In terms of MSc in ethics, maybe the APHRC team can guide on that. I don't know if there's something they're planning. But most of us would attend short courses. So like through the NACOSTI, different funding bodies, they organize these short ethics courses that we attend. And that now gives us just the basic foundation on how to look at reviews critically, know what to look out for and what to disregard. But APHRC, maybe you can comment on the MSc in ethics.
Okay, maybe thank you, Lucy. I might come in there. So me, I was lucky to do an MSc in bioethics, then funded by the European Commission in KU Leuven in Belgium. But I am aware that the KU Leuven in Belgium is still offering that particular course, an MSc in bioethics. But this time around, you have to pay. In Africa, University of Stellenbosch has an MSc in bioethics course. The University of KwaZulu-Natal has an MSc in bioethics course. There is the University of Kano in Nigeria now that is also setting up an MSc in bioethics course. And AMREF University has certificates, certificate courses. And I think they're also extending to have an MSc in bioethics. But I completely agree with you, Lucy. At most of the time, it's actually a gradual process. And there are very open access resources with courses in bioethics, research ethics. There is what they call the tree, which I can put the link in the chat there at the end of this discussion. So there are quite a couple of resources, free resources, online resources now, where you can get involved within the bioethics academic discourse. But as I mentioned, you have quite a couple of universities that offer MSc in bioethics courses. I'm not very sure if most of them provide scholarships as we speak, but there are quite a couple. I'm happy to continue this discussion after this call, if somebody is particularly interested in pursuing an MSc in bioethics. So I see there is another question, Lucy, from Ivan Namakula, and he says, how is animal research regulated? Where are animals sourced?
Okay, so thanks, Ivan, for your question. So animal research is regulated via, so as an institution like KIPRE, we are mandated by the National Council for Science and Technology. So within a given country, there'll be a body that basically gives you the right to then handle any work around animals. And that organization will require you to submit reports to them, either quarterly or annually, okay? So they're the ones who regulate the science of animals. In terms of sourcing, remember we have centers where, for instance, mice are bred. So we are able to breed our mice and then expand it that way. So we have different places within the country that have mice. So rather than avoid inbreeding, sometimes you can get from some of the universities or another research center that has animals. And that's how we support the work around where we get our animals from. Thank you. I think there was a question on funding. Which avenues can we explore? So maybe I'll answer Jack's question. Which avenues can we explore as early researchers to tap into research funding? I think there's not a single source, or there's no website you can go to that will list all of them. And we know the big ones, Wellcome Trust. At some point there was NIH. What excuse me, I think what works, it's through your collaborative networks. People can put you in touch with specific funding bodies. There could be some country-centric ones. So like if you look at Japan, there's a JICA one which funds bigger research programs. But the other smaller funding organizations that you could probably tap into. So sometimes what I do for myself is you could go to the website, check for granting funding bodies, and that will generate for you a whole list of funding organizations. So for me, the web is a source of, a lot of information. But it helps when you're in networks like this with the ARSH program to also reach out to them and ask them. And I think part of this training, if you're part of the ARSH program, you'll be told more about the funding opportunities you can tap into. Okay.
There's also one question from Nancy. What is your position on testing of human vaccines using animals? And is this not a breach of animal rights?
Thank you, Nancy, for being to the point. I think this is a very important question. To be honest, if you look at the history of vaccination, a lot of the vaccines that are used have passed through an animal. Even the most recent COVID vaccine was passed through an animal. And until we have an alternative, and when I say alternative, something that can have the immune system present, the blood circulation, and all the parameters like a whole organism, I don't think we'll move totally away from animals. I know, and again, I'll just be frank, I know NIH is stopping funding around the space of animal work. They're looking at organs on a chip as an alternative. But in this context and in Europe, this is not well developed. And that's why I started with my talk showing the history. Things are evolving all the time. And if we find that organs work best, then we will all move to that space. So that space is still under regulation. And I don't think it's really a breach because a lot of the vaccines we've tested we're using currently have been passed through animals. Thank you. I think, thank you. Luchua sent a link on Africa Research Excellence funding. Okay.
Okay, I don't know. Do we have other questions? Eugenia? Alipio?
No, none.
Okay.
I think all have been answered. Okay.
Maybe as Lucy takes some water, maybe just a couple of reflections around what we are actually doing. And maybe let's come back to context when it comes to discovery research, because I know a couple of people are going to ask the question, why discovery research? Maybe it's important for us to know that discovery research is the engine of scientific possibility that actually pushes on us generally beyond the known to confront unanswered questions that shape the future of health and humanity. But as we move deeper into today's conversation around discovery research, most importantly, the space or where we sit in the continent, it is important for us to situate discovery research within a very rigorous ethical architecture, often exploratory, high risk, and foundational. And that's why this discovery research push us beyond our boundaries, pushing us actually beyond what is known before clinical application. And I know Lucy mentioned something, which is really very critical around informed consent. But a more important question, and I think she mentioned this, informed consent is not static, but the question that you're supposed to ask yourself all the time is, how informed is informed consent? And if you move from there, we move straight into dimensions of vulnerability, because we're asking ourselves that, yeah, we might have to do research amongst vulnerable populations, or maybe at times vulnerable animals. And another question now comes to mind: why should we do research among vulnerable populations? And that's where it's also very critical to try to unpack and operationalize the concept of vulnerability. Equally, institutional governance structures must promote data integrity, because we are actually in the age of data. Not only integrity, but data integrity, transparency, and a lot around conflict of interest. This is really very, very critical. And maybe at the end, Lucy might maybe throw some light on how they are managing this at the Kenyan Institute of Primate Research. Many African institutions still face a lot of gaps in ethics training, inadequate exposure to emerging technologies, and limited mentorship in responsible research practices. It is therefore critical, and this is what, as an institution, we have taken up as our mandate, to strengthen the capacity through continuous education, ethics education, certificate programs, and active engagement with ethics committees. This is really critical for ensuring that discovery research is both excellent and ethical. As an institution here at APHRC, we are lucky to have actually host what we call our virtual academy. And the couple of months that are going to come, we're actually going to be hosting specific courses on research ethics that actually reflect our contextual realities. In Dr. Lucy's presentation, there were a couple of examples where a lot of unethical research was done in the continent. But if you look at most research ethics courses that are out there, African examples are really not part of the content. So it will be very critical as we launch this African grounded research ethics courses to actually bring in these African examples where unethical research was actually done, so that the scholars can actually connect. Maybe, Lucy, one question, but as I end, it's very important for us to know exactly that trust is the currency that actually determines whether science is going to thrive or is going to fail. Trust should actually exist, not only between researchers and the participants, between institutions and communities, between researchers, but also between science and society. Maybe from a governance perspective, Lucy, maybe, I don't know if you can just reflect when it comes to your experience on the dimensions of ethics, governance, trust, and trust between fellow researchers, trust between fellow researchers and regulatory authorities, and where you see as actual next steps within the ethics of discovery research in the continent. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. So in terms of the ethics, the data, and trust, I think as I ended my talk, I sort of brought in the whole idea of national committees that are being set up to manage and guide. So in each research institution or university, there are different ethics committees that have been established. And there's a reporting system that is happening. So we have to report to the national government or the National Scientific and Innovation Committee. And under that committee, we also have to undergo training. So I think it's every year we have to, apart from them writing the reports and submitting, we meet with them and they take us through. And we tell them what are the challenges we're having? How do we improve? So that continuous training, that continuous contact is what's making a difference in the continent now. I think that the data aspect is still relatively new. And when I reached out to a few of the scientists that I collaborate with within the country, when it comes to genetic data, I don't think Kenya has even a policy in place on how do we handle that. So what I was then referred to was to the CDC Africa, because they are developing one. So maybe if they develop one, we can borrow from that. But we as scientists, there's a whole aspect of research integrity. You must abide by that as a scientist, because it's on you. You're being trusted with a patient's data. You're being trusted to handle, in my case, if it's animals. And you're always constantly questioning yourself, is what I'm doing right? Is what I'm doing right in terms of the subjects you're handling? And I think also in forums like this, it's engaging with each other that you can also have those checks and balances. So I'm hoping really through the APHRC program, we can also bring some more unity, and where there are gaps, we can fill them by engaging with each other. So that would be my final take. Back to you, Lucio.
No, thanks so much, Lucy. And I don't think we have any further questions. But as an organization, Lucy, we want to thank you once more for your time and for this very exciting and enriching discussion. And maybe to our audience, just thanking you for joining us for this specific webinar. It is just the beginning of discussion. And as we mentioned, you can just follow us in the various social media platforms. And we have contact people here from the ARSH unit here at APHRC. So if you have any specific questions, please do feel free to engage with the social media platforms or send your messages. Once again, APHRC is thanking you, Lucy, again for facilitating this discussion, and all our participants for attending. The discussion has just started, and looking forward to more engaging discussions in the coming weeks and months. Thank you very much and have a great day and week.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gina.